Hello and good morning, and thank you for joining our webinar this morning. So we have Simon Brown here from NetApp and Stuart Curry from Bytes.
Good morning, and thank you for your time. Hopefully this is going to be short and sharp, but to the point, and get across the core messaging that both NetApp, Bytes and Microsoft can provide when it comes to cloud services. Just a quick note on this slide here. As you're probably well aware, Bytes are one of the largest UK software license resellers for Microsoft in the UK. We hold over 32% market share for Microsoft Azure, and we are one of NetApp's fastest growing partners. Ultimately, what we're here to demonstrate to you guys is the capabilities and the partnership between NetApp and Microsoft around their flexible and scalable storage solutions, not only for what we know them to be very good at, which is on-premise, but more importantly, as the IT market matures around the cloud, their capabilities for hybrid and cloud services. So without further ado, I'll pass you over to Simon, who will be able to go straight into this.
Thank you, Stuart. Morning, everybody. My name's Simon Brown. I'm the Alliance Manager in the UK at NetApp for our relationship with Microsoft. What I'm going to do today is to talk through some of the sort of broader value propositions that we have outside our core kind of backup and recovery tool set, so specifically around private cloud, a little bit on virtualization, and then the implication of those two things into our Azure plugin for private storage, and how that then obviously looks to broaden out into and include other hyperscalers as well. But before we get into that, I thought it was probably worth just spending a couple of minutes setting the scene in terms of our corporate relationship with Microsoft and where it's come from, and kind of why we're at the point that we're at today with them. So, okay. That looks like it's working a wee bit better. Apologies for that, everybody, and sorry for keeping you on tenterhooks. So let's just get into the background in terms of how we've got to where we are today. So our relationship with Microsoft has been quite a long time in the making, actually. If you go back to our kind of inception when we first came to market 15 years or so ago, when we were all about file server consolidation, we didn't have a relationship really to speak of that was particularly friendly with Microsoft, because obviously we were all about file server consolidation, and of course that meant reduced license fees for Microsoft. But over the course of the last 10 or 15 years, as we moved through specific application developments like Exchange and SharePoint, where we built optimized software platforms for backup and recovery primarily, into the virtualization age that obviously exploded with growth from VMware's perspective, and then pulled the rest of the market along into this kind of private and now hybrid and public cloud arena. We've gone from kind of strength to strength with Microsoft. That last piece from a cloud and a virtualization perspective is what we'll start to go into in a little bit of detail over the next sort of 15-20 minutes or so. But in terms of how we partner with Microsoft today, the level of integration both between ourselves as a product development set, but also as a company alliance, is pretty deep. So if we look at our customer service and support, for instance, we now have on our FlexPod converged infrastructure platform full cooperative support with Microsoft for HyperV and Server 2012 solutions deployed on FlexPod. So it wouldn't matter in that instance whether it was ourselves or Microsoft or indeed Cisco that you called to place a support call. You know, the first responder to that would own that until any issues are resolved. And actually, just as an aside on that, we currently run at about 98.2% of all of our first responders on that co-op support matrix are resolved on the first call, as opposed to having them escalated into some of the other contributing partners. Our product development and technical integration element, we obviously will talk about that a little bit more as we go through this session this morning. From an alliance perspective, we are a multi-award-winning partner from or with Microsoft. At their annual Partner Awards conference for the last 3 or 4 years, we've either been recognized as finalists in specific categories or as award winners in things like management of virtualization and private cloud. And crucially, from a solution development and testing perspective, this isn't just kind of marketing collateral that we'll talk through with you today. These are actual solutions that we can either demonstrate that we've sold in practice, or that we can bring you into Microsoft's Technology Center and show you in Reading these solutions working, and we stand side by side with Microsoft and present those to you. So we're quite happy working together closely and then bringing in a wider virtual team with key partners like Bytes or our technology partners for things like FlexPod, and in that instance, obviously, we'd be including Cisco. A little bit more just to reinforce the fact that we've won some awards, which is always a good thing. So in terms of our session today, we'll spend a little bit of time just talking about how typically the needs in IT over the last 2 or 3 years in particular have really started to change significantly with people's willingness to start adopting cloud services or desire to plan toward adopting cloud services. We'll talk about how we solve some of those problems, and also some of the steps that typically we work with our existing customers on in terms of building out so that they have the ability to choose where in the cloud they place either compute resource or storage or any other service that they look to provision from there. So as we kind of look at the challenges that people face today, we have I guess from mid-range right the way through to large enterprise customers, many of the same challenges, albeit just amplified a little bit at the lower end, I think, because resource often is very much more constrained in a small mid-sized enterprise than it is in an enterprise where you perhaps have full teams of people available to manage storage or applications. So how and where we deploy the technology, how you protect data, and your ability to deploy that simply and cost effectively is crucial, because if your business requirements are changing quickly, how do you respond and stay competitive with it? How do you build the characteristics into your business that either your internal users or your external customers have got used to having in their day-to-day lives? And by that we mean the kind of self-service capability that people now desire to go onto an application store, for instance, and provision their own app that they might need for a day, a week, a month, a year, but then have the ability to take that away, to delete it, or to just continue to build out their own personalized IT. And obviously with the proliferation of things like bring your own device, that just gets amplified. So we know as the business grows, the needs evolve, and actually those desired requirements from internal users and external customers become very, very important. So it doesn't really matter what type of technology or infrastructure they're looking at. What we need to make sure that we deploy and that we look after you with is something that's simple, that it's cost effective, and that's very easy to manage. So when we look at how people today are kind of looking at simplifying and cost effectively storing data and managing that, we need to make sure that backup and recovery and business continuity solutions continue to grow with them. But also with that growth, we don't want to introduce complexity. So how we keep that simple through virtualization, that starts to become a priority. And that virtualization isn't just at the server layer or compute layer, that's absolutely back at the network and into the storage layer as well. And also as we kind of move through that stack from storing and protecting to managing and then scaling out into the cloud, how then you can choose to deploy services and solutions that are either beyond your skills or budgets, and who you choose to take those services and skills from in a cloud environment. So every organization will have a different place within that continuum where they fit, but regardless of where you fall, NetApp absolutely have the solutions that kind of fit and grow with you along that line. So let's have a look at kind of our traditional IT and actually how cloud and service-oriented infrastructure has changed that. So I've been in the industry now for, crikey, about 16 or 17 years, and I started at EMC. And 15, 16 years ago, we were talking still at the time then about people having individual stovepipes of information, and at that point, typically it was all directly attached. So it was DAS stovepipes that people were looking at managing and trying to gain control of. Well, whilst the detail of the technology behind it has changed, the gist is still pretty much the same, because we still look at individual stovepipes, albeit on a much larger scale. So you might have individual storage area networks, for instance, for specific applications. So, you know, the problem hasn't really gone away, it's just been amplified. So when we look at kind of next generation data centers and the characteristics that they carry, you know, the ability to share an infrastructure, to pool resources, and to allow you, through virtualization, to move from silos to shared pools of compute and storage, it's incredibly important. So as we look at this slide, the left-hand side represents kind of our point solution, our traditional IT that is built to service an individual application as that comes on, or an individual group of applications as that comes online. And typically the mentality is that each project has its own decision-making process, and obviously that's where the silos result. The choices make sense in the context of the silo, but obviously it's a very, very inefficient and inflexible way of managing your infrastructure. On the right, though, we start to look at a bit more of a holistic view and process for IT, where it's focused on creating an infrastructure that will host all applications and customers and projects and internal users in a horizontal fashion, so that everything can be shared pretty easily. This is obviously service-based, so the underlying infrastructure behind that also matches the requirements of the software. So as opposed to being a kind of project-based approach with silos, you're then able to build in automation and self-service and orchestration around that, and it becomes a much more cost-effective, elegant, simple to manage, and efficient IT infrastructure to base your organization on. So over the next couple of slides, we'll just kind of skip through these as points to bear in mind and maybe come back to us on, because these are the elements that we're not really concentrating on today. So I mentioned at the start of that where we've grown as a company in terms of our relationship with Microsoft and the products that we produce for that. So on here, and obviously you get a copy of these slides afterwards, we talk a little bit about the benefits and the technology behind our optimized tools for SharePoint, Exchange, and SQL. The two that we do go into detail today are in and around System Center and a little bit into HyperV. The point being behind all of this, though, is that we have, as a single unified storage architecture that sits below all of these application tools, the applications themselves, and the compute requirement as well, a single unified operating system that can cater either for long-term archive, for tier 1 applications, for high-speed database processing requirements, just a single operating system and a platform that gives you the scale and the ability to deliver and pool resource across all of those applications. So let's start to look more specifically at a couple of the tools from Microsoft. So private cloud from Microsoft is something that they've been talking about pretty heavily for the last sort of 2.5 years, and I think it's fair to say that that's kind of as a direct result of that consolidation of System Center into a single suite of products as opposed to a big a la carte menu of tools. So we'll spend a lot of time on this presentation talking about this kind of bottom half of the cloud. So from our integration into SCOM, so System Center Operations Manager, implication of that into Orchestrator and into self-service provisioning, and also then how that correlates to the general day-to-day management and automation of your storage environment, so your NetApp environment. So our integration with System Center, which is kind of the building block for our whole cloud story with Microsoft, is PowerShell. So in terms of a management tool set, either to allow you to do things at a scripting level or to actually build out automated workflows within the System Center Management Suite, we have a toolkit, a PowerShell toolkit that's freely available to all of our customers that currently now numbers in excess of 1,300 lines of PowerShell script. So, you know, it sounds like a big impressive number. What does it mean in practice? What it means in practice is that as we have a single storage operating system, so clustered on tap or data on tap, we are the only Tier 1 storage vendor that is API complete with System Center. So that means that any task that you would want to manage and run and automate and take manual process out of the equation on a NetApp storage device or a FAS, you are able to report and manage and orchestrate completely through System Center. Our nearest competitors, in contrast, are up to about 32, 33 different individual tool sets through PowerShell, which obviously limits some of the tasks that you can run. And to give you a really nice example on this, as far as our converged infrastructure stack is concerned, we have things as simple as allocating additional capacity to an application, right the way through to, on FlexPod, deploying from cold start the FlexPod to support 2,500 users with a single line of PowerShell script inside 4 hours. So that level of integration is incredibly detailed, and it was this that gave us our first kind of nudge and award from Microsoft a couple of years ago for Private Cloud Partner of the Year. So what we do in this instance is we really enable System Center as a data center ready management tool. It's very difficult to qualify something as being completely data center ready unless it has the capability to manage everything, not just from the server and compute layer, but right the way through the network into the storage layer. And obviously, if you are API complete, so fully integrated with that software stack, it makes your ability as a customer to manage that infrastructure that bit more powerful. We run some group sessions and some dedicated one-on-one customer sessions out of Microsoft's MTC specifically around this, and there's a kind of little cookie-cut agenda that we have that we run with Microsoft around this whole System Center management piece that gives us 2 or 3 hours that we'd love to bring you along to with Bytes to just look at this in a wee bit more detail. So then we look at virtualization, and what's interesting is that I do quite a lot of work with the System Center team in the UK at Microsoft, and also into SM&P, but across their enterprise business as well. And what's interesting is when we present to customers and talk to them about how far along the road towards building their own private cloud, they are often, the customers turn around and say that, well, we're almost 100% there because we virtualize. What's interesting is that both ourselves and Microsoft and our technology partner Cisco on FlexPod all subscribe to the same list of qualifying criteria for what makes or what characteristics build a cloud, and they're provided by the National Institute of Science and Technology. They list virtualization as a common characteristic, but not an essential component of a private cloud. So whilst customers recognize the cost-saving benefits of virtualization and the efficiency benefits of that, and obviously utilization and all of that kind of good stuff, what it doesn't do is it doesn't provide the ability to self-serve, for instance, or orchestrate an infrastructure in the way that provides a user with something that looks, feels, and smells absolutely like a public cloud offering. So it's important to make the distinction that if you're building kind of private cloud-based infrastructures, virtualizing on its own isn't enough. And what surprised me when this study was published internally at NetApp from some research that was released in spring last year, was that even though we have many customers and prospects talking about how well embedded their virtualization strategy is and their relationship either with Microsoft or VMware, how many still have so much more left to do, whether that be from a compute standpoint, or actually when they start looking at replacing storage infrastructure, for instance, that might be 4 or 5 years old and absolutely based on those kind of dedicated silos as opposed to that resource pooled capability. So why is it relevant for us? Well, we have a storage or a virtualization guarantee at NetApp that as yet, and it's been in place for about 5 years now, we haven't been called on, and that guarantee is pretty simple. We guarantee that you'll use at least 35% less storage from NetApp versus your existing storage supplier if you deploy a virtualized environment on NetApp. And we have some very, very unique value propositions around that include deduplication and provisioning and those kind of things that just extend your storage environment to better manage your virtualized compute environment. And I suppose the easiest way to think about it is, in the way that HyperV and VMware virtualize and build pools of resource from a server perspective. It's exactly how we set out to manage the storage environment behind it. What's interesting is that we can manage and do very successfully across a whole gamut of significant enterprise customers other people's storage in our own controllers as well. So we can put our operating system as a layer across those competitiveness from a NetApp perspective, but virtualize that so that it looks, feels, and smells like a NetApp infrastructure on the back end. So we maintain some investment protection for you as a customer, but we allow you to drive some greater benefit out of the investment that you've already got. Now, one of the bits that is becoming readily apparent to us at NetApp in the market over the last couple of years is the shift from a customer perspective towards HyperV as a viable and deployable alternative to VMware. So when I work with our friends at Microsoft in Reading regularly, and they'll quite happily hold their hands up and talk about the fact that versions 1 and 2 of HyperV in terms of the features and functions comparison couldn't really stack up to VMware's offering at the time. HyperV version 3 kind of changes that, and it changes that significantly. The latest IDC stats that were released back in May, June time highlight HyperV now as the fastest growing hypervisor for new virtualized server deployments. Over 32% market share, up from 17% less than 18 months ago, and their prediction over the next 18 months is that that will go north of 50%. So within the next 2 years, HyperV will be the dominant market leader for hypervisor deployments. And there are a couple of really simple reasons for it. I hinted at it just now, but version 3 works in a way that is comparable, either equally or slightly in excess of generally VMware's value proposition from a hypervisor perspective. But also because they're bundling it in, I won't say it's free, but it's bundled in essentially with the operating system, so Windows Server 2012. As customers are buying that new OS, they then get essentially unlimited virtualization from Microsoft anyway, and if that toolset then works in a way that it hasn't before, it becomes a very viable alternative for customers. We'll talk a little bit towards the end of this presentation about some of the organizations that have moved away from VMware onto HyperV in a very, very quick, easy, risk-free, and efficient manner. And one of the things that facilitates that is truly unique to NetApp is our ability to shift and automate that shift without the need for expensive services or swing kit between hypervisors. So successful is that technology that Microsoft now have included that within their own migration automation toolkit. So this slide starts to highlight how Microsoft used NetApp technology to migrate people away from VMware onto HyperV. And what we're finding is that whilst customers might be looking at a viable alternative to VMware, they're obviously very nervous about making a wholesale change to begin with, whether that be from an existing investment perspective in terms of the skill set, or just the risk in terms of deploying something that they're not familiar with. So what we're tending to find is that customers are starting to use HyperV concurrently with VMware, for instance, maybe in test and development, which is a fantastic kind of fit alongside a NetApp deployment, as well as you can kind of provision as many copies as a test and development environment as you'd like with NetApp. Very little storage overhead, almost instantaneously. And if you're then aligning that to a hypervisor that's at least costing you nothing, that becomes a very, very efficient part of your business. So we move through this map for shift section of the deck. This slide highlights where on YouTube you can find and just look for MAT for shift on YouTube. It highlights how Microsoft used that and how quickly you can affect that hypervisor migration. So nice thing to reinforce. You start to build out your private cloud capability on site. You might want to take control back from your users who are going outside your business for things like Dropbox or even Amazon Web Services, to give them that self-serve, easy and very, very responsive infrastructure that they desire. As a business, then you may take the decision to reevaluate your hypervisor strategy, and some of you could well be a fair way down that road already, and we start to make that even easier once you've made that initial kind of consolidation at the back end from a storage perspective. We start to make that shift between hypervisors and build in the choice that you then have in terms of which workloads you put on which hypervisor and who you then partner with. And then we start to look at how those two things help us connect into the cloud, whether that be maintaining your own on-premise private cloud, whether that be looking to link into some of the cloud service providers from a Rackspace through to an Atos or to any of the big sort of GSIs of Fujitsu, or into the true hyperscale cloud providers, so an Amazon Web Services, Azure. We are starting to deliver to our customers the ability to make it really easy for them to adopt cloud services. But for you to get there, you absolutely need to adopt the characteristics on your own infrastructure that allow you the flexibility to move in and out of those clouds and give you the choice behind what part of your infrastructure, what compute resource, and what part of how much of your data you actually want to push out there. It's an interesting strategy for a storage vendor, right? We're looking to try and encourage people to move to the cloud. Our theory being, and so far it's been proven, is that the easier we make that, the more obviously people will come to rely on us as their on-premise platform, and the more and more of their infrastructure then they base around that. So how do we do it? Well, trying to build some sort of hybrid data center is difficult because you have obviously governance issues, you have connectivity, performance, for instance, and whether or not you could essentially run a database out in the cloud, but is that really going to perform for you in terms of the way that it connects back to your on-premise solution? How do you protect it, and how do you guarantee availability? So we start to provide more control to you as organizations around the integration of those different resources, specifically the public resources. So following on from our announcement about 12 months ago of NetApp Private Storage for Amazon Web Services, we announced about 3 weeks ago NetApp Private Storage for Microsoft Azure. So essentially what this is private storage parked right on the edge of the Azure cloud. So it would remain, so in this case it would be a storage device from NetApp that remains an asset to you as a customer that either you or a partner can manage, that doesn't sit in an Azure data center. It sits in a local geography data center, and we'll talk about those in a second as we move through, but has direct connection into the Azure cloud. It also has direct connection into Amazon Web Services. So as a customer, you can start to address some of the issues that, you know, certainly our big enterprise customers and some of our mid-sized organizations are talking to us about, which is how do I maintain control, sovereignty, security, and management of my data? Using compute in the cloud is relatively simple. Moving data out there and then managing that effectively and cost effectively is a much, much bigger headache. So why run the risk? Why go through the unnecessary costing, if you like, of pushing storage capacity out into the cloud when actually you can put something on the edge of the cloud that gives you all of the compute capabilities that you might want to look at, but whilst you maintain sovereignty and control of your own data. So we talked a little bit about how or what that connection looks like and where we sit on the edge of the cloud. What are some of those benefits that drives for you as a customer? So obviously you can burst in and out for compute capability, for instance. Your ability to scale from a storage perspective is significantly increased, and actually if you look at essentially managing that as a private resource, you know, the scalability is actually down to you as an organization, not either the bandwidth that you have available in the cloud or the budget that you have available once you're, you know, your first shot of Azure cloud or AWS is provided to you at very, very low cost, but it very quickly escalates into a high cost model in terms of managing that on a day-to-day basis. But crucially, your ability to port data between those platforms, because actually if all routes lead back to your own private storage platform, it gives you so much more flexibility in terms of which of those hyperscalers or cloud service providers you choose. And as we move through over the course of the next 12 months, this value proposition will broaden to include more hyperscalers, and it will also start to broaden in terms of pushing our operating system capabilities out into those hyperscalers as well. So not just necessarily being restricted to an individual private storage environment, but obviously pushing out some of the core OS capability into the cloud as well. So where does it sit currently? So we have live sites now, 3 in the US, 1 in the UK and 1 in the Netherlands with Equinix, who also will be hosting the express route connection for us, for AWS and Azure right the way across the rest of the globe as well. So a single hosting outfit, Equinix in the UK, and as we talked about a couple of minutes ago, it's literally, you know, 2 hosted services with a direct connection through Microsoft Express Route into the Azure cloud. Where's it going to fit? So the interesting thing is one of the little case studies that we often talk about together with Microsoft is a fantastic use case for Azure. So Dominos Pizza in the US use public or hybrid cloud infrastructure very little. They tend to use it for about 72 hours once a year. And over the last 2 or 3 years, it's the same time every year. And it's around Super Bowl Saturday when, you know, 250 million Americans sit at home on a Saturday night and want to order pizza while the Super Bowl's on. So for that instance alone, Domino's uses your compute resource to significantly increase their capability to serve those customers. So they burst into the cloud, and when that immediate surge and requirement has gone, they just scale back that. And that absolutely is something that you can look to build into your private storage infrastructure as well. Putting enterprise workloads out there, whether it be SQL or SAP or Oracle, using those high-performance databases, for instance, out in the cloud, but again, maintaining control and availability of the data at the back end. And you can start to drive cloud BI and big data analytics and all of that kind of good stuff. The interesting thing is as a kind of local stat in terms of how quick those connections are. We reckon they're so far running at about 36% quicker than standard VPN connections. So we've done a whole load of testing around this, as you'd expect to see, but we're obviously quite happy to share more detail with you if this is something interesting to you after the event. And where have we done this with customers, and who currently are kind of supporting this this whole cloud or Microsoft Cloud messaging on NetApp? So ING Direct Bank in Australia are one of the big flagship references for us. So Andrew Henderson, the CIO there, has now been moved over to ING Corporate in the Netherlands to replicate what they built in Australia. And ING's big issue was that as a relatively new investment in Australia, their ability to take market share from their competitors was limited by the fact that their development cycles were quite slow. So it would take them about 12 to 13 weeks to provision a full copy of the bank, for instance, to allow their developers to test and develop. They deployed Microsoft Private Cloud, so System Center, HyperV, and Server 2012 onto FlexPod about 2 years ago. And in addition to the standard kind of benefits that we as a storage company would go out and talk about, you know, in terms of backup and recovery window shrinking and physical savings in terms of storage, the single biggest benefit for ING, the fact that that whole development cycle was shortened from 13 weeks down to a couple of days. And copies of databases for the developers were available in 10 minutes. So that significant saving in time allowed them obviously to bring new products to market far quicker, but also to start to make better use of their test and development team and actually look at different ways in which they could use the information that they were able to share around very efficiently, and the automated way that they were able to do it, and of course how the users were able to request and self-serve all of that capability. Much more locally in the UK, Hymans Robertson are a fairly small actuarial outfit based in Scotland. They have about 800 employees, and the big issue, or they had 3 issues that they wanted to look to try and address. The first was that they had a significant requirement from their own internal users to invest in an IT infrastructure that would provide everything the users needed that currently they were moving outside of IT for. So there's a dreadful phrase that floats around at the moment called shadow IT, which is essentially people looking outside of the business for stuff that their own internal IT shop can't provide. And as I say, whether that might be a collaboration type tool in the terms of Dropbox, or whether that be actually if you're a test and development team looking at Amazon Web Services, for instance, and just using a credit card to buy those services. So they wanted to get some control around that and to kind of future-proof their IT infrastructure for the next 4 or 5 years to make sure that they could respond to those kind of requirements. They had a very old, aging storage infrastructure that was about 5 years old, and they also had a significant VMware renewal that was coming up about 6 months after their first phase, which was the storage consolidation. They got the first phase out of the way by deploying and consolidating on NetApp. Phase 2 was then moving from VMware over onto HyperV, which they used Map4Shift and our Project Shift technology for. And in August of last year, they finished building out their System Center private cloud capability. And we've now started talking to them about their options around adoption of Azure, and obviously how much of their compute resource they might want to look to push out there, and how they can best make use of their existing investment in their NetApp environment and their Microsoft private cloud piece to allow them the flexibility to choose which hyperscaler cloud provider that they want to use. In both cases at ING and at Hymans, in this case the CIO is a guy called Barry Smart. Both individuals are more than happy to take reference calls to point prospects of ours and Bytes into their own internal teams that were involved in those planning processes. So obviously there are checks and balances that we can put in place if we move through developing opportunities with you. And where else can you go to see this? So we have a full NetApp infrastructure and a full FlexPod for private cloud infrastructure deployed in Microsoft's UK Technology Center. Microsoft run what they call immersion sessions around both private and public cloud, and those immersion sessions for the last 18 months have been run on FlexPod. So every time as an organization you go into Microsoft, even without our involvement, and you have an immersion session around private cloud, it's being run on FlexPod and NetApp. And I would actively encourage you to bring yourselves and your team in via Bytes to one of the sessions that we run at the MTC, and obviously if you have some details that you'd like to pick on specifically after this call, we'd be happy to host you in a dedicated session to dig into some of those requirements in a bit more detail. But not only are we there and deployed in the UK, but right the way to EMEA and the rest of the globe. We're deployed in every MTC globally for Microsoft. So all that remains for me to do is to just kind of sum up what we've talked about over the last 30 minutes or so, which is our core value proposition outside of typical Microsoft Office workloads like Exchange and SharePoint and SQL is absolutely around cloud, whether that be private, public, or kind of the holy grail for the majority of our customers and prospects, a very, very effective hybrid cloud. The characteristics that you need to adopt to enable you to take on those technologies and those opportunities, how you build them, the customers that we've helped already to do that, and the efficiencies that you can look to drive as a result of making some of those decisions and taking some of those cloud services based on an infrastructure at the back end that allows you to choose wherever you'd like to place your data and your compute resource. So at that point, I'll close and be happy to take some questions.
Okay, thanks, Simon. So if you do have any questions, could you just pop those in the questions box, which is on the right-hand side of your screen, and Simon will answer those for you shortly.
Sounds like I'm getting away lightly.
You might be, yeah. We'll give it a couple of minutes, and then if there aren't any questions, then we'll just end the webinar. Okay, so we have a question here. Who's this from Stuart asking, so what are the next steps I need to take if I'm looking to deploy this service?
So I guess it's a response for both ourselves at NetApp and you guys at Bytes. The very first bit is to make sure we're discussing with you exactly where you are today, to see how far you are already along the road to either virtualizing or building out your own private cloud capability, and what steps you need to take to get you there first. From that point then, actually, what kind of services would you be looking to adopt, either from some of the larger service providers or some of the big hyperscalers? So it's absolutely kind of a bit of a back to basics start, which is let's find out where you are and where you're looking to get to over the next sort of 2 or 3 years, and we absolutely would be looking to build out that plan with you, and Bytes have been very successful with us over the last couple of years of doing exactly that. So nice and simple. Just give us the chance to come in and talk to you about what you've already got, and then we can talk to you about where you'd like to get to.
Thanks, Simon. So one more question asking, so do NetApp offer cloud assessment or readiness services?
Yes, we do. And ours, not surprisingly, are obviously pretty specific and dedicated towards and biased towards the storage environment. So we would always encourage somebody to look to kind of broaden that engagement to include a bit more of their infrastructure, and at that point, obviously, we're reliant on partners like Bytes to make sure we deliver the full kind of assessment capability. But we have some dedicated tools to allow us to do that for you from a virtualized compute perspective, right the way through to standard kind of storage assessments and infrastructure assessments. But most of those will run in partnership with our partners.
Thanks, Simon. So we have a question here from Tom, and he has asked, so how does this fit in with Microsoft Store Simple?
Good question, and I'm actually glad somebody flagged it. So it depends. So Store Simple is a fantastic little tool for departmental opportunities, for fairly local, low availability and low performance requirements. So absolutely, if it's cheap, cheerful, and simple stuff that you're looking for to look to start to provision, Store Simple will work very successfully for you. But if you start to really look at basing enterprise applications out in the cloud, looking at potentially using cloud services for test and development, for having high availability and significant efficiencies around backup and recovery to include deduplication and thin provisioning and all of that kind of stuff, then Store Simple won't cut it. And that's where you start to look at true enterprise storage providers. And obviously, we're in a fortunate position here at NetApp that, we're currently the only show in town that allows you the ability to choose which hyperscaler provider or service provider that you use. And we're able to do that because of the way that ONTAP manages not just information on your own storage infrastructure, but as I say soon, how some of that is then virtualized and out in the cloud as well. So it depends on what your requirement is, but if it's very simple and pretty low end, Store Simple is a great tool for that. But the minute you start looking at more complicated workloads, different applications, performance requirements, it just won't cut it, especially from an availability point of view. Does that answer your question? I hope so.
Okay, I think so. Oh, he said yes. Yes, that has.
Brilliant, thank you.
Okay, thanks, Simon. So it looks like that's all the questions that we have today. So thanks so much, Simon, and thanks everyone for joining the webinar. And as mentioned previously, if you could please fill out the critique form, that'd be really, really helpful. Okay, so thank you everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Excellent. Thanks ever so much, Amy. Thanks, everybody.
Hello and good morning, and thank you for joining our webinar this morning. So we have Simon Brown here from NetApp and Stuart Curry from Bytes.